Hello and welcome to the 5th series of Forthright,
the podcast with, for and by women writers.
If you enjoy the show, please give us a follow and a review wherever you listen to your podcasts.
We've got some fantastic writers for you coming up. We hope you enjoy.
Hi and welcome to the Forthright podcast. I'm Sam.
And I'm Anna, and today we're absolutely delighted to have Kia Abdullah. Hello, Kia.
Hi, Anna. Hi, Sam. Thank you for having me.
Oh, we're so pleased to have you. So Kia is a best-selling author and travel writer. Her novels include Take It Back, the Guardian and Telegraph Thriller of the Year, Truth Be Told, which was shortlisted for the Diverse Book Awards, and Next of Kin, which won the Adult Fiction Diverse Book Award and was longlisted for the CWA Gold Dagger Award. Those People Next Door was a Waterstones Thriller of the Month pick, and Kia has also been selected for the Times Crime Club. Kia has written for the Times New York, the Guardian, the Financial Times, the Times and the BBC, and is the founder of the Asian Booklist, a non-profit that advocates for diversity in publishing and helps readers discover new books by British Asian authors. Her new novel, What Happens in the Dark, is freshly out in the world and just came out on the 19th of June, and we're going to hear a short reading, so here's the blurb.
Lily and Safa were best friends growing up. Now, Lily is the nation's favourite breakfast TV presenter, and Safa, once a renowned journalist, is reeling from a recent fall from grace. When news breaks about suspicious bruises on Lily's body, Safa attempts to rekindle their old friendship, but Lily claims the bruises are nothing to worry about. And then one night, the police are called to Lily's home. Lily is strangely calm, and a body lies dead at her feet. Lily pleads not guilty, and then says nothing more. Driven by her desire to give voice to all victims, Safa begins her own investigation into what happened that night. But Safa is not prepared for what her quest for justice will uncover. Fab, if you could just let us know whereabouts in the book that you're reading from.
Yes, so I am reading from a scene where Safa is trying to get hold of Lily. Lily's husband, Richard, has answered the door and is basically refusing to let Safa see Lily. And so that's where we join the scene kind of halfway through.
Fab.
That is none of your business. I think it is my business, Richard. She pushed the door just enough so that he could feel its tension. He stepped out and brought his face close to hers. You need to get off my property. His hot breath hit Safa, making her recoil. I want to see Lily, she insisted, and I want you to get off my property. He placed her finger on her chest with the barest pressure. It took Safa a second to absorb that he was touching her. Her stomach gave a single churn as she shoved his hand away. What the hell are you doing? He bared his teeth, a smile, but not a smile. Has it ever occurred to you that you're just a cheap hack, Safa? Yes, I remember you. I also remember Lily saying how embarrassing it was that you won't let her friendship go, how you clung on like a leech, desperate for a job at the BBC. She won't tell you straight, so I'll tell you instead. Leave her alone. With that, he slammed the door in her face. Safa slid off the stairs, smarting at his words. Could Lily really have said those things? It was true that Safa had persisted through several unanswered texts, certain that Lily had meant to reply, but it had just slipped her mind. She cringed now at the breezy tone of the text she had sent after the last time they had met. Hey, I forgot to ask. I don't suppose there are any jobs going in your team at the moment. No worries if not. I'm just getting a bit tired of freelance life. Safa had always been mindful not to ask Lily for favours. As her success grew, more and more people asked her for things, and Safa didn't want to add to the noise. Sometimes she sensed that even finding time for dinner put too much pressure on Lily. It's why she had couched her request so lightly. In truth, she had barely been able to pay her bills. Lily never replied to that text or the several after. Perhaps it was inevitable. When childhood friends achieve such different levels of success, it was naive to think that they could stay close. To learn now that Lily had griped about her to Richard humiliated her. She backed away from the steps, her nerves still jangling from the confrontation. She looked up at the house and saw a shadow retreat from a window. She waited and watched for Lily, but nothing else stirred. Safa's pride bristled. If Lily truly didn't want her around, then Safa would stop trying. Her intuition, however, told her not to be so childish. if there was something darker happening, then Safa couldn't just let it be.
Oh my goodness, this book. I don't know, I can't really where to start, but it's such a page turner and it's got such fantastic momentum. And how do you go about writing something that's, this pacey?
Well, thank you so much. So I am a plotter, and I know plenty of the writers you interview are pantsers, but that is a mysterious and dark art to me. I will definitely, you have to sit down. I have to know what's happening in my novel. I did try it the other way with Those People Next Door, but I just, landed in a bit of a quagmire. And so for me, it was a real way for me to find out my technique, which is, you know what, even if I have to spend weeks, sometimes months, figuring out what the plot is, and what, the 3-act structure is, what the chapters are, sometimes by scene level, I'll break it down, then that's just my technique and that's the way I write. I do leave a little bit of room for, serendipity to hit me, because otherwise it can feel a little bit like paint by numbers if you plan everything too strictly. But for me, to keep the plot up and to keep the pace up, I really need to know where the story is going, because I honestly just don't understand how people kind of manage to write these amazing, well-potted novels without planning. It's just, it's something I don't understand.
So practically, what does that look like? Do you do your planning in a spreadsheet, or have you got a million Post-it notes stuck on your wall? What do you do to plan?
I use Google Sheets, and it has evolved in time. I used to just use a Word document when I started, but now I am very kind of thorough. And so I'll kind of plot it out in a rough 3-act structure. I wasn't so structured when I started, but halfway through my kind of novel writing, I read a book called Stealing Hollywood by Alexandra Sokolov. And, she talks about the 3-act structure of movies. And what was really interesting is when I look back at my early novels, they actually fit into this 3-act structure anyway, even though I hadn't planned it that way, because I think just as consumers of stories, we have an inherent understanding of the 3-act structure. But now I will kind of think of it in that kind of rigid way. I'll plan out, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, split it up, and then think about chapter by chapter, sometimes write kind of scene by scene. And then I have lots of different tabs. So one will be the chapters, one will be the characters. And I won't always kind of map out each character to start off with, but as they grow in the novel, I'll add little notes. So I know, one character might have a certain tick. So I have to be careful to suddenly not give another character the same tick or mannerism. And so I kind of keep track of everything. I'll even look up kind of stock images to give people a face. Yeah. And so I have an idea of what Safa looks like. And so I'll try to find somebody who looks like her. And then I know what her face looks like and so on. And then as I carry on, there'll be another sheet for questions. And because I write legal thrillers, I'm not a lawyer. And so there's tons and tons of questions that come up during the course of a novel. I dump all my questions there. And then in the writing, I'll put like a little X in brackets. And so I know that wherever there's an X in brackets, there's a question that I need to fill in at some point. And sometimes working in that way works against me, because when you find the answer of a question, you're like, oh my God, that actually affects what happens later. And so you have to go back and kind of tweak it a little bit. And so if I know that it might change something later on, I'll try to find the answer to the question then. Otherwise, I'll try not to let it kind of ruin the momentum of writing for me.
Yeah, because I was going to say that the court scenes, for example, seem very realistic, and that you must have to do a lot of research, spend a lot of time in the courtroom to kind of get that level of authenticity. But so what you're saying is sometimes you have to retrofit the court processes, for example.
Exactly. So when I started, Take It Back was my first courtroom drama. I spent a week at the Old Bailey, and then I wrote a barrister into helping me as well. So he invited me to Chambers, and since then, God bless his soul, he's answered about 300 questions for me. But yeah, sometimes, it's small stuff like, can a juror wear jeans, or are they expected to dress smartly? Mm-hmm. Can you wear sunglasses in the public gallery? So things like that, that aren't so consequential. But then sometimes it will be bigger things, like at one point I have Safa talking to a defendant, and somebody said, well, that wouldn't happen. And often experts are really helpful, because they'll try to kind of massage a way that it can work for you. So they might say, well, look, maybe the dock officer is distracted, and then she has literally like 30 seconds to talk to the defendant if that's really key to the narrative. And so they will try to help you with ways around it. And one thing that's really interesting to me and heartening is sometimes experts actually give me different answers. And so I think, well, actually, the layman, if the experts have different answers, the layman certainly won't know if this is right or wrong. And then sometimes that encourages me to take a bit of creative license.
That's really interesting, because I think sometimes it is the small things that readers pick up on, isn't it? Like those kind of little inconsistencies or things of, wearing sunglasses in court when you wouldn't normally.
I won't lie, it does bug me when I get things wrong. I remember in one of my novels, initially a scene took place in Bow Church DLR station, and then I changed it later on to Limehouse DLR station, which is my local station, so I know it very, very well. And then somebody wrote to me and said, at Limehouse station, you go up to the platform, not down. And I was like, oh no, that's because at Bow Church you go down and not up. And I had just forgotten to change that little bit. And I remember in another scene, initially somebody sends someone roses. And then later on I thought, well, roses are quite a romantic flower to send, whereas this is a platonic relationship. So I changed it to lilies, but I forgot that there were thorns on the next page. And so, tiny little mistakes do get through. And look, I used to work at a magazine. I know, you can have like the best sub-editors in the world. Errors will still get through. And so I try not to kind of, beat myself up over them. But it is annoying when you've gone to such lengths to get it right, and then these small mistakes creep through. But, we're only human.
You write the most incredible characters as well. And I wanted to just ask you about Safa. I mean, she is such a great character. Will we see more of her in a future book?
Yes. So that's a question on a lot of people's lists. They really want to see her again. I'm glad you've said that. She might be my favourite character, actually, that I've ever written. And so Amazing. She is back in the next book, and she's working on... So the people who've read What Happens in the Dark will recognise the case that she's working on in book 6. So, yes, she'll be back.
Brilliant.
And so you mentioned there about, having worked on a magazine, because you took a bit of a U-turn in your career, didn't you? Because you did tech.
Computer science.
You started off in tech, yeah.
So, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, so kind of what... Then you were working for Penguin. Was it? No. Is it Penguin?
I was working for Rough Guides, which is a travel brand under Penguin Random House.
Yeah.
That it was travel as opposed to kind of fiction or anything like that.
And then that led you on to being able to eventually write full time. But so what was your route? Yeah. So what was your route to publication like?
So I basically chose computer science because I followed the money, and I kind of built up, I call it my own trust fund. I worked in tech for 3 years. Then I quit and I went and worked at a magazine. And obviously there I was writing features, and then ended up writing travel. But I always wanted to write fiction. I always wanted to write a novel. And so once I decided to do that, I was querying agents once I wrote Take It Back. And for me, that was the biggest barrier to publication, finding an agent. And I think I queried about 80, that's 80, and didn't get anywhere. Yeah. And, I wasn't going to give up because I really loved Take It Back, and I knew that it had legs. And fortuitously, I saw a tweet from a US agent on Twitter saying that she was looking for what we used to call own voices fiction back then. So kind of diverse stories by diverse authors. And I thought, well, let me try the US. And I queried 5 agents in the US, and 3 of them wanted my book. And after querying 80 agents in the UK, I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
And so I said yes to one of them. And then things basically happened really fast. And that's often the way with publishing, it's slow and then fast. And so once I got my deal, I was just absolutely delighted. And I've stayed with HQ at HarperCollins for 5 books. And I'm writing book 6 at the moment.
So was it a US agent who negotiated a UK book deal?
Yeah, that's right. And people are often interested in this. And I think the nervousness in the UK was twofold. I think firstly, the premise of the novel made people nervous. So in Take It Back, 4 Muslim boys are accused of a heinous crime by a young white girl. And from my perspective, it was a bit of a reaction to some of the headlines we were seeing in the media at the time. Anytime a Muslim person committed a crime, you'd always see that part of their identity pulled out in the headlines. You'd always see Muslim person committed so-and-so crime. And I thought, well, when's the last time you saw Christian man commit so-and-so crime? But at the same time, we were seeing things like Rochdale happening. And so I think, rightly so, agents maybe felt that it wasn't the right time to be trying to sell this book. But I think the second thing, and you often hear this from black and brown actors, is that they have to go to the US in order to find work. Yeah. And I think the UK is interesting. The actor Riz Ahmed said this, we export this idea of kind of lords and ladies sitting at Downton Abbey having high tea, when actually on the ground we're very diverse and we're very tolerant. And America, the culture it exports in its movies is a kind of melting pot of different sort of fighters fighting side by side. And I think maybe they took to the kind of message of the book more easily. So then, yes, Jessica Faust, my agent, who's brilliant, she negotiated the UK deal for me, and HarperCollins bought World English rights. And so, it is a bit of a funny relationship because most UK authors have a UK agent, but it's worked out quite well for me.
And can I just ask them, with the initial debut then, were you signed for one book or were you signed for several, or has it had to go out on submission every time, or how's that worked?
I signed a 2-book deal. So I wrote Take It Back and Truth Be Told. And then maybe halfway through Truth Be Told, I was asked to come up with kind of synopses or ideas for the next 2 novels, which I did. And then Manpreet, my editor, basically gave me another 2-book deal and then another 2-book deal. So I've had 3 2-book deals with HarperCollins. And so we'll probably start negotiating for the next 2 soon.
It's fantastic. It's just, it's really nice to know there's more coming for sure. And with your the travel writing and then writing novels, what would you say kind of the main differences with those bits are?
The travel writing, I have to say, is a lot easier because obviously it's short form. And so, it might be a day before you see something out in the ether and you're getting feedback, which is really great. And so it's just a different form of writing entirely. I think I am running out of ways to describe the sea, I have to say. And so sometimes I do, the travel writing, I'm getting to a stage, I've been doing it for 10 years. So my partner and I, we started Atlas and Boots, our travel blog, in 2014. And so this is the 11th year. We have seen a huge drop since Google introduced the AI overview. And so as a kind of industry, I'm not sure if travel blogging has a long life left in it. For me, it's been amazing because I know that at the end of the month, my mortgage is going to get paid because, as I'm sure most authors tell you, it's really hard to make a living off fiction alone. And so next year, I've got a little bit of kind of reevaluating to do. Do I want to carry on the travel writing? Do I want to get a part-time job to supplement my fiction income? It's a bit of a period of uncertainty.
That's really sobering about the AI overview thing. I hadn't heard anyone talk about that yet. Because obviously the AI feels like a big threat to writers in lots of different ways, but not that immediate, I guess.
No, it's already taken. Look, we suffered hugely under the pandemic and we were kind of seeing a little bit of a bounce back. But now I would say we're at 10% of the revenue we used to get pre-pandemic. And I can't blame people. Look, I use the AI overview myself. If it can give me an accurate, like for example, if I want to figure out something technical on my phone, I'm not going to click through to the blog that created the instructions, and they're not getting the ad revenue anymore. And so how can I complain if I'm doing that as a reader? How can I complain about doing that as a writer? So it's really tricky unless we all take a kind of unionized decision to switch off the Google AI overview. It's just going to happen across the board. And so, if you previously wanted to find out how to do a certain hike in, say, Sri Lanka, and you were clicking through to Atlas and Boots, we were getting the ad revenue. And now you might just find out without ever leaving Google. And so, it's been really immediate for us.
Yeah, it does feel like the world's moving extremely fast in that sense as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you're reading for pleasure, do you read within the genre that you write, or what kind of things do you enjoy to read?
I read all sorts. And so, yes, I'll definitely read crime when I'm not working, because especially if I'm in a rut, because there's just something about a crime novel that, picks you up and sweeps you away. And so recently I was in a bit of a reading rut and I read Night Watching by Tracy Sierra, and that was brilliant. But I'll read all sorts. At the moment, I'm reading something called Mr. Sidhu's Post Office, which is a book out next year. So I am kind of reading it semi for work because I'll be providing a blurb if I like it. But I recently read Demon Copperhead, which I absolutely loved.
It's so wonderful, yeah.
Oh my God. I never expected, I just had this idea that all my favorite novels were already written. And then when I read that book, I thought, God, it's amazing that my favorite books are still being written and there are books to discover in the future. And she's a genius. And I absolutely love Demon. And so I'll read anything as long as it's got a compelling story. I probably don't read as much nonfiction as I could or should, but there's just something about fiction that takes me away.
I like that idea that our favourite books may still yet not have been written.
Exciting. So back with the writing, what's like a good day in the office look like for you? In terms, when you've done your spreadsheets and your planning part, and you're sitting down to write, how do you measure your success?
So when I'm in the midst of writing, I try to do 1,500 words a day. And now I found a structure that works for me, which is 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. at my desk. And I find that if I restrict the time at my desk, I get the work done. And I know your podcast started off as, writing around the kids. And I think it's a cliche to say, but necessity is the mother of invention, isn't it? And so when I found that I had the whole day, I would spend the whole day and I would float around and I would go on TikTok and I would do this and that. And now I'm like, okay, I've only got 4 hours at my desk. And that really helps me to kind of compress my time, compress my productivity and get it done. And so in the morning, I'll go to the gym. I love boxing. I'm actually Safa, through this book, I found boxing because she takes a couple of boxing lessons. I thought, I have to take a few lessons to write those things accurately. And I went to my local boxing gym in 2023 and I absolutely fell in love with it. So 2 years later, I still go very regularly. So I'll either do that in the morning or I'll get some admin done. And then 12 to 4, if I hit my 1,500 words, then I'm happy. And then on editing days, I try to only do 1,000 words to just really make sure that what I'm writing is up to scratch.
So how long does it take you from idea to final draft?
So I have this technique that works well for me now, which is I just get through and I don't call it my first draft. I call it draft 0. And I mean, I would say from like beginning to end, it takes about 9 months. But the first draft, maybe I can get that done in about 4 months. And, when I say first draft, it's just sometimes it is the literal mechanics of a scene. There's no color, there's no beauty to it whatsoever. It's Safa walks into the room, Safa sits down, Safa has a cup of coffee. Just so that I know that the mechanics of the scene are done, I have enough story. And if it's about 20,000 words short, that's fine. I'll add color later. But I want to know that the narrative is sketched out. So that's kind of where I am at with book 6 at the moment. I have 60,000 words. I've got to the end. And now I know, okay, now I need to go back to the beginning and basically spend the next 4.5 months getting it up to scratch for my editor. And then obviously she will, with her, maybe I do 2 to 3 rounds of revisions. And then obviously there's the copy editing and proofreading and so on.
Before you give it to your editor, though, do you have anybody who, in your kind of trusted circle, who you would let read? Or is the first reader your editor?
Not anymore. So the first novel, of course, so I had, I think, 5 beta readers, and then I did several rounds of revisions with my agent. But now Manpreet and I just have an understanding and we just have a really good relationship. But also the timelines don't really allow for that. Once you're a crime writer, they expect a book a year and that's quite a quick timeline. And so to ask people, most people would probably want a month to read the book. And so to ask people to read the book and then get back to you, and then for you to have time to edit it, it doesn't really give you enough time. So I do just kind of work with my editor now. I think in theory, I'd like that. Maybe one of those readers would have picked up the fact that I had thorns on lilies, for example. So the more eyes you get on a story, I really do think the better it can be. But sometimes the timelines don't allow for that.
Where does the inspiration for your stories come from?
It can be anything. I read a lot, so as I said, I read a lot of fiction. I consume a lot of stories, so I watch TV, movies. But what I really find energizing is being out in the world, talking to people, hearing people's stories and anecdotes. And I often think stories are a kind of mixture of things. So it could be one story that you've heard, but if you transport it to a different situation, then suddenly it becomes more interesting. So, for example, in Next of Kin, I heard about this story about a father in America being accused of homicide because he had left his twins in the back of his car on a really, really hot day, and unfortunately they passed away. And meanwhile, he had been having an affair, and so the prosecutors accused him of leaving his children on purpose. And because I don't have kids, I thought, my God, imagine if I had left my niece or nephew. And suddenly it just became more interesting because I thought, God, when you're related to somebody by blood, because in his situation, I would very much expect that to splinter the family and he and his wife to get divorced. But if you're sisters and you've done it to your own sister, how does that affect your relationship going forward? Do you stop talking to each other? Are you able to rebuild your family? And so that became the basis for Next of Kin. And so it can be just a mixture of different things. And I found the pandemic really, really hard because writing in a vacuum was just sapping for me. There were days where I was just on my sofa going, I don't know. And partly that was because that's the book that I hadn't plotted, but partly it was just not being able to go out or, we're magpies, aren't we? We might see a very interesting laugh or an interesting feature. And I've heard on your podcast before of reality TV, if you're watching Race Across the World and somebody has an interesting feature, you pick that up and you use it in your novel. And for me, being out in the world is that. And so I found it really hard. So, my ideas can come from anywhere and everywhere.
You've written, obviously, in kind of very different styles, whether it be travel writing, tech writing, obviously now writing novels. But for any of our listeners who are new to writing, who want to get into writing fiction, what would your piece of advice be to them?
So two pieces, one kind of craft related and one industry related, I suppose. The first is simple, just read stories. I don't think you can be a writer without reading a lot. And so, and read widely, not just in your genre. And it's as simple as that, really. Lots of people agonize about the fact that they don't have enough money to go and do a creative writing master's or a creative writing course. And I always say, well, that's not necessary. I think if you read widely and read a lot, you have an inherent understanding of what fiction is and should be. And the second thing I always say to aspiring writers or new writers is just remember that there's no shame in being a weekend warrior. I think for so many of us, it's, the gold standard of calling yourself a writer is I do this full time and it pays all my bills. And firstly, that's quite a high bar. But secondly, it's almost impossible to make a living off fiction alone. And so if that's where you're setting the bar, you're setting yourself up for failure. And so there's absolutely nothing wrong with being an accountant or a lawyer or having a staid, stable, sensible job and writing at the weekend and evenings. It doesn't make you any less of a writer. And in fact, I was talking to a friend of mine recently who sold his film rights and was able to quit his day job. And he said, Kia, there are almost too many hours in the day. And I'm almost thinking about just going and being an Uber driver or something just to be out there in the world again. And so, and I've heard this from a teacher friend of mine who's now a full-time writer. And so it's not necessarily the best thing. So just bear that in mind.
Yeah, it's so true. I think a lot of the people that we speak to are juggling the writing amongst doing, other work as well.
It's also very reassuring to think, actually, it's helps in that kind of rich tapestry of writing to be able to go out in the world and do all those other things as well and bring all those experience back onto the page.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the peace of mind you get from being able to pay your bills. You know, that should be your priority, being able to pay your bills and not have to worry, because worry is not conducive to writing. And so, if you have to go and do the computer science degree and you never manage to leave tech, that's okay too, as long as you try to find enough time to write. It doesn't make you any less of a writer.
I think that's a fabulous place to end our conversation. So for listeners who might want to hear more from you or just find out about other projects and so on, what's your social media?
You can find me on Instagram. I'm at Kia Abdullah. I'm also kind of on X and Blue Sky, but not very active. But Instagram, especially Instagram stories, is where I'm most active.
Fabulous.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. We've really, really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Sam. Take care. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening.
Don't forget to like and subscribe and tell your writer friends about us.